So namaste everyone and welcome again to our Upanishad class this morning. I will start with a brief review, but just two of the teachings we saw last time I want to lift up and emphasize. So when we concluded our class last time, I want you to recollect the two ways in which the teacher emphasized that we should recollect and we should understand the nature of ourselves. When we speak of Brahman, we are speaking of ourselves, we're speaking of Atma. Pratibodha Viditam Matam. We saw that important line. Pratibodha Viditam Matam. Pratibodha. In every thought, not only in every thought, but in every state of mind. Pratibodha Viditam Matam. Brahman, myself, yourself, has to be understood as the unchanging awareness in every state of the mind. Not only as awareness in every state of mind, but also as that which makes all states of mind possible, which makes possible the very functioning of mental processes themselves. And, I gave the example of the screen in the cinema when we go to the movie. The screen is the ground on which the entire scenes of the movie occur. And it is so easy to see all of the images and to forget that these images require a basis, adhisthana in Sanskrit we say, a basis, a ground for their being, for their functioning. So like the screen, Brahman, Atma, is the ground on which all mental activities takes place, and it is that also that makes all mental activities possible. So in this sense, Atma, Brahman, is not a thought. It is not a particular state of mind. It is that which is present in all states of mind. So knowledge, as I said last time, requires a number of things. Knowledge of an object requires an object, in this case, let's say, I give the example of requires the book. It requires a sense organ, in this case, chakshuhu, or the eye. It requires a certain condition of the mind, the right thought. This is book, but we do not stop there. In the Upanishads, we say it requires a fourth factor. Not only the object, the sense organ, and the corresponding thought, but it requires awareness, the light of awareness. Why? Because the object, the sense organ, the mind are all inert. They are, in Sanskrit, we say they are jada. They are composed of the 5 great elements, Panchamaha Bhutas, the 5 great elements. And that which is inert or jada can't give rise to knowledge. The light of awareness is necessary for knowledge to occur. So when there is an object, there is a properly functioning sense organ, the right thought, and when all of these are illumined, we use the word illumined by the light, jyotihi, the light that is awareness, then alone knowledge occurs. Thoughts change, the conditions of the mind keep fluctuating and changing. That itself is not a problem. It's the very nature of the mind. Is defined as changing, and we must be grateful that the mind can change. If it didn't, then we'll only have one state of mind or one thought all the time. So the fact that the mind changes is a gift of the mind. So thoughts change, but awareness doesn't. So just as images on the screen change, but the screen itself does not change. Thoughts keep flowing, the processes of the mind keep occurring, but the ground on which these occur, which is Brahman, you, I, ourselves, does not change. So in knowledge, there are changing thoughts and unchanging awareness. Because awareness is always present, when the mind is functioning, we don't think that they are separate. We don't think that they are different. Just again, coming back to my analogy, when we go to the cinema, we never think that the images on the screen, we're not even aware of the screen, so we don't think that the images are different from the screen. So we tend to identify both of these. But when the thought is, awareness is, but awareness is not the product of a thought. It is independent, it is unchanging, it is always present. So knowledge means moving our attention from the changing thought to the unchanging awareness. Moving from the changing thought to understanding the unchanging awareness. That's the ground of all thought. So as we saw, when Brahman is understood in this way, as the unchanging ground, Pratibodha Viditam, then the teacher, the Upanishad also mentions one of the important phalas, one of the important fruits of Brahma Jnana, of the knowledge of Brahman. And the teacher here chooses to mention Amritatvam hi vindate, Pratibodha Viditam matam, Amritatvam hi vindate. When one knows and understands oneself in this way, what does one gain? What is the phala, the fruit of this knowledge? He says it's Amritam, Amritatvam, immortality, freedom from the fear or the anxiety of death, of extinction, of ceasing to be, because as we learned earlier in this text and in so many other parts of the teaching, this awareness is free from the limits of time. It is Sat. Sat is that which exists in all periods of time, past, present, and future. So one does not become immortal, one discovers through knowledge that one is immortal, that the self, the Atma that you are, that I am, that it never dies. As Gita teaches, and I quoted last time, na jayate mriyate, it is not born, jayate mriyate, it does not die. So the teacher says here in the end of part 2, Atmana vindate vidyam, vidyaya vindate amritam. Vidyaya, vidya is knowledge, vidyaya, by knowledge, through knowledge, vidyaya vindate amritam. Very beautiful line. Vidyaya vindate amritam. By knowledge, vidyaya vindate, one wins, one gains, one attains what? Amritam. One gains amritam. Asato ma sadgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityor ma amritam gamaya. From that lead me to immortality. And here the Upanishad says, vidyaya, by understanding. And the final point I want to remind you also from last class. So Pratibodha Viditam matam, knowing it in all states of mind. That's how it is to be known. Not as separate. And apart from the mind, but present. When the mind is, where the mind is, there Brahman is, there Atma is. But teacher also says, Bhuteshu bhuteshu vichitra dhiraha. Bhuteshu vichitya dhiraha. Bhuteshu. So when we understand the nature of Atma, Brahman, we do not understand it as a truth or a teaching about Atma that is unique to you or to me. We understand this to be bhuteshu. This also to be the truth of every being. It is not unique to any being. This is the truth, this is the self that is present in everyone. Sarva bhut atma. Mad atma, sarva bhut atma. This is one of the lines in Guru Stotram. One who understands knows, Mad atma, myself, sarva bhut atma, is the self of all beings. So teacher says here, bhuteshu vichitya dhiraha. The wise one knows that this is not only herself or his self, but this is the self of all. What is true for me is true for all beings. No one is excluded. I can't value myself and devalue anyone else. It's a very important truth. I can't value myself and devalue anyone else because Mad Atma Sarva Bhut Atma. Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. I honor the teacher who has helped me to understand that truth. Mad Atma Sarva Bhut Atma. Myself is the self of all beings. So that concluded part 2 of Kena Upanishad. And then, of course, we move on today to part 3. It's a very beautiful section, runs a little bit into part 4 of the text. So what was taught before, up to this point, is now illustrated in a very beautiful story. A story that can be read at many different levels. It is one of my favorite Upanishad stories. It is based on, in our Hindu tradition, we have certain recurring stories or certain recurring myths. And this is based on the ongoing rivalry between the devas, who are the virtuous beings, not perfect beings by any way, any means, but let's call them virtuous beings, and the asuras, those who lack virtue. So there are many ongoing stories about these rivalries between devas and asuras. So the Upanishad takes up this story and uses it in its own way, creates it, recreates it to illustrate all that was taught before, and does it in a wonderful and a very profound narrative. So in this part of the text, in this story, the primary characters are the devas. The asuras they assume, but they don't feature prominently in this story. So what I'm going to do is sort of very briefly summarize the story for you. Perhaps some of you are not familiar with it, and then make some suggestions. And you can also think along with me, having studied this text together, how does this story connect with the teachings that we have been studying for the past 10 classes. So part 3 begins, Brahma ha devebhyo vijigye. That Brahman won a victory for the devas. Brahma devebhyo vijaye, won a victory for the devas. So we assume here, it's not stated, but we make the assumption that the devas emerge victorious in their conflict with the asuras. But something happens. What happens? Tasya brahmana vijaye So that victory, which was won by Brahman for the Devas amahiyanta, they became amahiyanta, they became full of themselves. They became elated. They aikshanta ayam vijaya. They said, they taught, this is our victory. We defeated the asuras. Asmakam vijaya. This is our victory. We achieved it all alone, all by ourselves. Asmakam eva ayam mahima. So not only did we achieve this victory, but mahima. We deserve any glory. We deserve all glory. Both victory and glory should be ours. So as we will see and we'll comment, it's a very interesting story because while it is connected, with the teachings of the Upanishads that we studied earlier, it is a more general story about the problem of arrogance. It's a story about arrogance and ignorance, because arrogance is a consequence of ignorance. It is said that the greatest obstacle to learning is not ignorance. Because if I am ignorant, I can learn. I can be taught. But if I am arrogant, then learning becomes almost impossible, because I claim to know already. If I'm simply ignorant, I can be taught, but if I'm arrogant, it's much more difficult to teach an arrogant person. So they became full of themselves. We alone did it. This is how they started to think and to proclaim, to announce to everyone, we achieved this victory. This is our great glory. So then the Upanishad says that Ha esham tat vijagnyau, Brahman came to know, Brahman knew, not came, but Brahman knew of their arrogance. As Brahman is Sarvagya, Ishvara is Sarvagya, all-knowing, knew the vanity of the Devas. But interesting word is used here in this, the second verse of part 3, Tebhya. So for their sake, not for Brahman's sake, but for their sake, in order to help them overcome both ignorance and arrogance, what does Brahman do? So, Tebhya pradur bhuva tat idam yaksham. So, in order to teach them, to help them, Brahman assumed a special form. And this here, in this story, is called a Yaksha. Brahman appeared before them as a Yaksha. Not a Deva, but a Yaksha, a worshipful being, a shining being, a being of splendor, a being in whose presence one feels a sense of awe and wonder, a resplendent, shining being, an attractive being, a being that does not inspire fear, but wonder, awe, admiration. So, but text says, they wondered among themselves when they saw this being. They said to themselves, Kim iti, who is this? We don't know. Navyajanata, we don't know who this being is. So they begin to wonder among themselves, who is this Yaksha? Who is this resplendent being that has appeared before us? So now next step is to find out, who is this Yaksha? Because they are very great devas. This is Agni, the lord of fire, of all heat. This is Vayu, the lord of the winds atmosphere. This is Indra, the lord of all the devas. And now they're confronted by a being, and they don't know who this being is. So they discussed among themselves, and they said to Agni, Te Agnim Abhruvan, O Agnim, and Jata Veda is one of the names of Agni. They said they call Agni Jata Veda, means one who knows about every being that is born, is one who knows all that is born. Everyone who's born, Agni knows. But Agni didn't know who this Yaksha is. So they said, O Jata Veda Agni, Kim etat yaksham iti etat vijanihi. Please find out, vijanihi, kim etat yaksham. Who is this Yaksha? You find out for us. Because you are the one who, you are Jata Veda. You will know the nature of every being that is born. So you go first to find out. So Agni is like, if you think of the cricket analogy, and many of you know, in this story, Agni is the opening batsman. All well attired, goes out onto the cricket pitch. So Agni approached Abhaya Dravat, approached this Yaksha, and our story takes an interesting twist. Agni is going now. See, it's a story, but every sentence is interesting, is illuminating. So Agni goes, he's going to find out who is this Yaksha, because he's deputized, he's sent in by his captain, Indra, to find out, to face the fast bowlers, as we say in cricket. And so he approaches the Yaksha, but before he could say anything, Yaksha questions him. Ka asi, who are you? Yaksha says. So he doesn't have the opportunity to speak. The Yaksha asks him, who are you? Which is interesting, because keep in mind that this is a story about arrogance, ignorance, and arrogance. So it would have been very surprising to Agni that here is someone who doesn't know who I am. Who doesn't know Agni? Everybody knows Agni. So now, in order to punch a little hole in his ahankara, or his ego, Yaksha says, who are you? Who are you? It's like, suppose it's a big function and you are a VVIP. You arrive with, all of your escorts and the fancy car, and there's a reception, a group of people waiting at the entrance of the hall for you, but no one recognizes you. You try to make your way in, and then you are asked, who are you? So Agni is asked, Ko asti, who are you? And then, of course, see how Agni answers. He says, Aham Agnihi. Aham Agni Vai. I am indeed Agni. Aham Agni Vai Asmi iti. Jata Veda Aham Asmi iti Abravid. So 3 times he says, I am Agni, I am Jata Veda. He doesn't say, but don't you recognize me? That's implied in the story. So Yaksha doesn't respond to that. After he identifies himself interesting, Yaksha doesn't say, oh, I know you now. I'm sorry, I forgot who you were. Please forgive me. No, Yaksha doesn't do that. Yaksha asks Agni another question. Kim viryam? Kim viryam iti? Kim viryam iti? Do you have any special powers? What power resides in you? What is your special power? There's an expression I'm forgetting now in these Marvel comics. Each one has, what is your superpower? What is your superpower? Kim William, iti, what is your superpower? Agni's asked. And so he replies very very, very firmly, idam sarvam api daheyam iti. I can burn anything on this earth. There is nothing on this earth that I cannot, daheyam iti sarvam. I can burn any particular thing on the earth, or I can burn everything on earth. This is my superpower. This is how he answered again, full of himself. So Yaksha doesn't, contest his superpower, but then Yaksha does something really fascinating. Trinam. Yaksha takes up a blade of grass, one blade of grass, Trinam, puts it in front of Agni, because Agni says, I can burn everything. So he takes up this blade of grass, puts it in front of Agni, and he says, Daheti. Okay, burn this. Now, you said you can burn everything on earth. I'm only asking you, this one blade of grass, burn this. And so the Upanishad says, then Agni approached. This is no problem. He doesn't say that, but this is no problem. What are you asking me to do? So he approaches the blade of grass with all of his force. All of his force. He approaches that blade of grass. And he could not burn it. He could not even ignite it. And so he retreats back. Interestingly, he goes back to Vayu and he goes back to Indra. He doesn't say what is wrong, what happened. He doesn't give them an account of what happened. He just says, I could not find out who this Yaksha is. Interesting. So he doesn't want to reveal the full account of his interaction with the Yaksha. He says, I could not find out who this Yaksha is. So he was, again, using the cricket analogy, he was clean bowled, and he goes back quietly into the pavilion, doesn't say anything. He probably makes an excuse and say, I was blinded, by the sunlight or something like that. So he goes back. He was too embarrassed to say what was the nature of the encounter with the Yaksha. So then they consult and they decide that they would send Vayu, the Deva of winds, Vayu, the Deva of the atmosphere. So he goes in. He's the first batsman is gone for 0. Vayu goes. You go. Please find out who is this Yaksha. So Vayu says, sure, I can do that. Let it be so. I will find out. So he goes, and he approaches the Yaksha like Agni did. And again, before he could say anything, before he could speak, Yaksha asks him the same questions. Kaha asi iti. Who are you? Who are you? And he answers, like Agni did similarly. Who are you? Aham asmi iti matarishwan. He says, don't you know? And so as we saw, Vayu was also called Jata Veda, one who knows the nature of everything that is born. He says, I am Matarishwan. I am the one who moves anywhere in the sky, one who moves everywhere. Aham Matarishwa. Vai Aham asmi iti. This is who I am. I am Vayu, I am Matarishwan. So he gives both of his names. Don't you know, in other words? Don't you know who I am? So he's also surprised, that he's not recognized. And his answer, he repeats aham 3 times or so. 3 times. I am this, I am this, I am this. So Yaksha also says to him, Kim viryam iti, what is your superpower? What power do you have? And he says, sarvam adya yadidam prativyam iti. Sarvam adadiya yadidam prativyam iti. I can move, I can lift up anything on this earth. I can move anything that is on this earth. Agni says, I can burn anything on this earth. Vayu says, I can move anything that is on this earth, like a typhoon, a tornado, I can move everything. And in moving, so I can destroy it as well. So as you can guess, by this time in the story, Yaksha took the same piece of grass, trinam, one blade of grass, puts it in front of Vayu and says, okay, Vayu, lift this blade of grass. So Vayu probably said, what? This is no problem. So the Upanishad say Vayu approached with all of his force, but he could not move it from where it was. Could not move that blade of grass. So he goes back also to, now of course he goes back to Agni and Indra, and he says, Etat vijaniyam na ashakam iti. I was not able also to find out who this Yaksha is. Again, no account of what happened, but I could not find out who this Yaksha was. So I also got bowled out completely. Both Agni and Vayu are like, sometimes you see cricket, the batsman comes out of the pavilion and stretches and goes through a long ritual display, goes to the wicket and looks around and makes his crease and squats up and down, puts on a long ritual, and then the first ball, the batsman is back in the pavilion. So this is reminded me of Indra and of Agni and Vayu. So who remains now? Indra remains. The Indra is the chief of the Devas, the lord of the Devas. So then, of course, they said to Indra, "Oh Indra, you please go and find out who this Yaksha is." And Indra says, "Of course, Tatheti, let it be so. I will go." And now something very interesting happens in this Upanishad story. So Indra goes, approaches this Yaksha. So remember now when Agni and Vayu went, Yaksha spoke to them, gave them a challenge. They all failed. Now Indra goes, approaches the Yaksha. And Yaksha doesn't interrogate, doesn't question Indra. But Upanishad says, Tasmat Tirodhade. As Indra came before the Yaksha, Tirodhade, Yaksha disappeared. Yaksha vanished, disappeared. Indra could not see. As an object, Yaksha vanished. But interesting, Indra stood there. Text says Indra stood there. Indra did not go back. When the Yaksha disappeared, Indra did not turn back and go back to Vayu and to Agni, but stood there. And then something happens. Tasmin eva akashe bahushobhamanam striyam ajagama tam hemavatim umam. And in place of the Yaksha, bahushobhamanam, a very beautiful, bahushobhamanam, exquisitely beautiful striyam, young woman. Striyam ajagama, appeared. Tam hemavatim. So the commentators, say hemavatim, hema, hemavatim could be, Shankara says it could have two meanings. One is, hemavati could refer to, is a name for Parvati, spouse of Shiva, or we can take it to mean also she was beautifully adorned with golden ornaments. Both are fine, but the word Uma is also used. She's called Uma, Umam. So it's what we can interpret it in this context here, that Uma appeared before Indra. And then for the first time, because Agni and Vayu were asked questions and they failed and they didn't do anything. They didn't stay there. They turned back and said, we could not find out. They never asked a question to the Yaksha. But Indra stood there. Yaksha disappeared and Uma took the place, appeared in the same place that the Yaksha stood. And Indra said, Kim etat yaksham? Who was that Yaksha? Who was that Yaksha? Who is this Yaksha? So he stood there patient and he asked a question. Who was that Yaksha? He asked to this beautiful Uma, Durga. And then he gets an answer. And she said to him, Sa Brahmeti. Sa Brahmeti. Uvacha. Uvacha. So she said that it was Brahman. You stood before Brahman. You were with Brahman. You were in Brahman's presence. And then the story says, and I will comment just to summarize. And the Upanishad says, that adds, the Uma adds, after saying you are Brahman, Brahmano va etad vijaye mahi yadvam iti tato haiva vidanchakara brahmeti. So it was Brahman's victory that you claimed as your own. It was Brahman's honor that you assumed to be your own honor, to be your own glory. So she identifies Brahman and says that arrogantly you claimed Brahman's glory to be your own glory. And so from that alone, Indra came to know that the Yaksha was Brahman. And so the Upanishad says, therefore, Agni, Vayu, and Indra, as a way of praising, they excel all the other devas because they were the first to come in Brahman's presence, and they came to know this Yaksha as Brahman. And Indra is even more exalted than the others because Indra asked the question and got the answer. Indra was the first to know that the Yaksha was Brahman. So that's the beautiful Upanishad story. As you can think, we can spend a lot of time contemplating a rich narrative like this, a rich story like this. But here are a few observations about this story. So, I mean, we didn't discuss all of this in the study of the Kena Upanishad, but I had covered some of this in earlier discussions, especially when we had studied together Tattva Bodha. So very briefly, in the Upanishadic accounts of the emergence of the universe, everything comes from Brahman. Yato va imani bhutani jayante. Brahman is that from which everything has come. And the Upanishad will always mention the five, what we describe as the five great elements: Pancha Mahabhutas, Akasha, space; Akasha, Vayu, air; Agni, heat; Apaha, water; Prithvi, earth, the five great elements. But in the Upanishad tradition, what we call Upanishad cosmology, there is also a very special connection between the five elements and the five senses. What we say, the microcosm, the senses, and the macrocosm, the universe, the five great elements, Pancha Mahabhutas, and the five sense organs, the Pancha Jnanendriyas. So, for example, space is connected with the air and hearing. Eyes connected with Agni, fire, or seeing, because light is necessary for sight. Skin is connected with Vayu, or air. Touch, it's something you can think about. As you go through the elements, we say that space, or Akasha, is only known through sound. Fire has one sense organ. The eye, you can see it. You can't see space, but we can see fire. Air, we can only know through touch. Skin, so it's connected with the skin, and so it goes down. Water is connected with taste and the tongue, and earth is connected with the nostrils and smell. So there's a connection between each sense organ and each of the Pancha Mahabhutas. So in this Upanishad story, Agni may be thought of as, because of this connection, Agni is connected with and represents sight, the eyes, seeing. And Agni is the first to approach the Yaksha, since sight is often the first sense organ through which we come in contact with an object. But Agni, in this case representing the eyes, cannot know Brahman. So now we must remember the teachings that we studied earlier, at the very beginning of Kena Upanishad. Yat chakshusha na pashyati. That which the eyes cannot see. That because of which the eyes see. So what can Agni do? We can't know Brahman through the eyes, because as we have seen, Brahman is not an object of sight. So we must remember, that earlier verse, Yat chakshusha na pashyati, yena chakshumshi pashyati, tadeva Brahma tvam vidhi nedam yadidam upasati. That which the eyes cannot see, but because of which the the eyes see. So not only is it Brahman not available for sight, but the eyes are powerless without Brahman. Can't do anything. There's no seeing without Brahman. So this is why Agni could not burn that leaf. Agni thought that all the superpowers were his. Like we think that the eyes see independently of Brahman, but every sense organ is dependent for its functioning on this one. Without this one, the sense organ is powerless. So similarly, Vayu corresponds to the skin and the sense of touch, another sense organ. So we can, read all of the sense organs into this story. And Brahman is described, in the Upanishads as asparsham, the one who can't be touched. Asparsham. Sparsha is touch. Asparsham is one without touch. So, with the skin, it is only because of the presence of awareness that we have the sensation of touch. It enables the sense of touch to function, to know as a sense organ, heat or cold or whatever the sensation is. But again, Vayu fails because no sense organ. Brahman is not an object of the senses. So how about Indra? What happens? Indra approaches Yaksha, and Indra is the lord of all the devas. Indra is Maghavan, the one who is worshipful. And then the Yaksha disappears. We saw. And then in the presence of the Yaksha, as the Upanishad says, Bahu Shobhamanam Himavan. Uma appears, Durga appears. So as we learned also in this Upanishads, yet Brahman is, I'm just repeating the line, yad manasa na manute, that which cannot be thought of by the mind, that which is not an object in the mind, but that which knows the mind, that because of which the mind knows but can never be made an object in the mind. So if we try to grasp Brahman as an object in the mind, it fails. In this sense, the point here, Brahman disappears because the mind will fail to objectify it, to know it as an object. But Indra did not go back. Indra did not give up like Agni and Vayu. Indra stayed, and Indra asked a question of Uma, of Durga. We can even say, of Saraswati. Who is that Yaksha? And then she says, Sabrahmeti. It was Brahman, who alone was responsible for all that you do, for all that you accomplish. So Indra represents the mind, intellect, the lord of the senses. But even the mind can't grasp or objectify Brahman. So remember, yan manasa na manute. If one tries to objectify Brahman with the mind, one will miss Brahman. It escapes. It escapes. It disappears, as it were, not literally, of course. And so Indra stood and questioned. Like the student, at the very beginning of Kena Upanishad, the student asked a question. Kene Shitam, what is it? So see how the text starts? Kene Shitam, what is it? And Indra asks, who is that Yaksha? So the one who questions gets to know, learns. Gita says, Pariprashnena sevaya. Learn by questioning. Not by giving up, but pariprashnena. Through the process of questioning, you seek wisdom. And so Uma here, Durga, Uma, Saraswati, the goddess, is the Shruti, is the Upanishad. One of the beautiful, in Sanskrit grammar, one of the beautiful things about it for me is that wisdom is always feminine. Vidya is feminine. Sruti is feminine. So when knowledge is personalized in the Hindu tradition, is always in feminine form. We don't have a god of knowledge. We have a goddess of, of knowledge. Even Brahma Vidya is feminine. Brahma Vidya is feminine. So you can say, she represents the teacher, but also the Sruti. We spoke at the beginning of our classes that the Sruti, the Veda, the Upanishad is the Pramana. It is the source of this knowledge. So it is not that Brahman can't be known. Brahman has to be known in a special way through the right source. And this is why the Yaksha disappears. But the one who identifies the Yaksha is Uma, is the Sruti. So the teaching of the Sruti is necessary for overcoming ignorance. There is so much that is there in this story, like the Yaksha, Brahman is right before us. You can also take that from this story. Brahman was right before them, all of them, standing in their presence as the one because of whom the eye see, the air hear, the tongue taste, the skin touches. But because of ignorance, what is most evident is not known. Is not known. We don't, and because of ignorance, we become arrogant. We don't recognize that I see because of Brahman. I hear because of Brahman. I taste because of Brahman. I touch because of Brahman. I walk because of Brahman. I speak because of Brahman. So that ignorance leads to arrogance. And therefore, ignorance and arrogance have overcome through, with the blessings of the teacher, Sruti, Guru, and Sruti. If you want to take the story literally also, that's fine. Then we can read the story as saying that even the devas need to be instructed. There is no alternative. Even for the devas, the Sruti is necessary. Sruti becomes the source of knowledge. So this is also a praise of the Sruti. And so with this story, part 3 of Kena Upanishad concludes. In fact, the story goes a little bit into part 4 of the text, and then there are 4 concluding mantras to bring this beautiful Kena Upanishad to an end. I leave you with this story today. I think that you can think deeply about it and see many, many levels of meaning in this story. This is why stories like these have transcend time, because they continue to speak to us even as our contexts change. And I think this is a really powerful and revealing story. So we will continue, as I said, next weekend, next Sunday, last class on Kena Upanishad. We will look at the concluding mantras of the text. They are all very important and very beautiful mantras. The student comes back again and asks a question of the Guru as the text concludes, and the Guru gives a very important response to the student's